You have a seat. When we talk about Vision Sunday, that's the key question we want to ask. Is Jesus in the lead? That's it. If we can say yes to that question, then we feel good and we feel confident continuing to move forward as we are as a church. If we look around and Jesus is not in the lead, then we need to take very quick assessment and say, okay, well, how did we get off track? And then how do we get back on track? And so this is a question that I think I want to make sure that you feel empowered to ask every single week about our church, that you personally have the ability to evaluate. Do I see what the church is doing inside of the words of Jesus? As I dig into the teaching of the words of Jesus, am I finding that the church matches up with his heart and with his mission and with his words and his thoughts? And then for you to be able to evaluate, hey, all right, well now what do I do? If I can confirm that, all right, cool, then I'm still plugging along. If I'm having a little bit of trouble seeing how what we're doing fits into that mission of Jesus, and I'm not so sure that we're necessarily behind him anymore, then that's a great time to come and have a conversation and say, hey, I'm kind of not seeing the Jesus piece here, right? Like that's always an open door and an opportunity to have a discussion about where is Jesus leading us. However, once a year, we take a Sunday, and it's always the first Sunday in October, to have this conversation very publicly. And so I want to make sure that we're having it here. Now, before we jump into the conversation, though, I always like to tell people why it's the first Sunday in October. And there's a couple of stories that kind of lead us to that. In particular, the first week of October seems to have an enormous amount of significance in the life of our church. And I don't want to tell you all of the stories, but I'm going to hint on one, and then I'm going to tell you the full story on a second one. The one I'm going to hint on, which is going to be the first story that I tell, I'm not going to tell the full story because I tell that story as a part of what we refer to as our Discover Foundation event that we hold once a month on the third Sunday of every month. And so people who are new or want to get to know more about our church, I always tell that story as we kind of hold that lunch after church. And it'll be coming up in... What's today? It's October. It'll be coming up in October. You can check the Church Center app if you want to jump in on it. The second one, I'm going to tell you the full story, and then I'm going to do as best I can. I ran over in the first hour, so I'm going to try not to run over in the second hour. We'll see. So why is it happening the first week of October or the first Sunday of October? Well, it all begins in 2016. In March of 2016, my wife and I came to the conclusion that we ought to be pursuing church planting. We came to that conclusion after a long season of trying to discover what were we supposed to be doing. And so we got there, and we didn't really know a ton about it. My youth pastor had planted a church with an organization called Stadia back in like 2004, 2005. And so I was aware of it. I had been to his church plant. It met in an elementary school up close to the Mall of Georgia. And so I was familiar with it. I thought it was just this really incredible model of birthing new churches and new church work in a community. And so I had always been drawn to it. We had other opportunities to serve other churches. I could have stayed at the church I was at forever. Like all of those were options, but we just felt drawn and compelled to look at something completely different. And so we came to that conclusion in March of 2016. Fast forward to the first Sunday in October 2016, and I was preaching a message out of Mark chapter 5 where Jesus comes in contact with a demon-possessed man. And I'm not going to go into that teaching or how it all gets there, but let me just fast forward that there was an accountability conversation with me with a really good friend of mine that came from me teaching that message, where he challenged me a little bit and had a really personal conversation about a lack of faith that I was having. And he didn't know what that was. He just said, hey, there's this one thing you're supposed to be talking about. Let's talk about it. And so as a friend, he and I had a conversation. And I confessed to him at that time. I said, hey, here's the deal. There's this one thing in my life that's happening right now, and that's back in March. God for sure confirmed to my wife and I that we should pursue church planting. And we've done absolutely nothing about it from March until today, and still even through today, because I don't have enough faith that God's going to provide for my family financially. You see, the church I was at, I was making a good bit of money, and honestly, the future of what I was going to make there was enormous relative to what I would be able to make in a church plant. And so I was pumped about it. In terms of ministry, in terms of financial security, I had made it, right? One of the wealthiest communities in the state of Georgia, and honestly, to be completely honest with you, there was very little that I couldn't do that I wanted to get done. right? So it was definitely a possibility. But I just knew for sure that this other thing was what I was supposed to be doing. And so I immediately, after that conversation, I said, you know what? I do need to take a step of faith. So I found a cliff and I jumped off the cliff. I opened my laptop, I went to stadiachurchplanting.org, and I filled out my application to become a lead planter, and I sent it in. And 90 days later, I finished my time on staff at that church. About 150 days later, I started working on the project here in Newnan that you know today as Foundation in spring or early spring, late winter, February, March of 2017. And we started working on the project. For 11 months, we would have community development and community discovery. And so that's how we got here. Fast forward to then the first week of October again, the very following year, 2017. To plant a church, you've got to raise at least $250,000 just to get it off the ground. That's just the way it works. And churches from all over were giving to us. There was churches in Tennessee, churches all over Georgia, South Atlanta, churches in Kentucky. There was churches from everywhere that was helping us raise the money to make this work happen. Churches here in Newnan, churches in Sharpsburg, everywhere. There's lots of people that were contributing to make that happen. And so while they were all giving, we still didn't have enough. And so I had this brilliant idea. Let's have a fundraiser. Yeah, let's have a fundraiser. And so we decided to throw a gala. Some people say it's called a gala. And so I didn't know which one it was, so I just started calling it the Gala Gala. And that's what we referred to it as, Gala Gala. And so we needed to raise a ton of money, though. We needed to raise a bunch of money to make sure that we were, this was October, and so our first preview service, which would be just like hey, come check it out. You can kind of see what it's going to be like. We did one in October, one in November, 2 in December, and then we launched weekly gatherings in January 2018 out of the high school. And so we were getting ready for that first one, and we needed money. Man, we needed money. And so I was sitting there thinking, God, remember that whole thing last year around this time where I was like, you're not going to provide? This is what I was afraid of, right? But I was like, you know what? This fundraiser is about to set it off. Right? We're about to raise so much money because we had so many cool things planned, like just incredible things. I was like, yeah, this will be good. So it's the first week of October. We're almost to the fundraiser, and I get a letter in the mail. It's a certified letter, and one you got to sign for. And I'm like, oh, this is the first big check. Let's go. You got to sign for those babies. You know what I'm saying? Let me see that thing. And so I open the letter, and it says, hey, we heard that you are having a fundraiser. We were having the fundraiser at Fox Hall. Someone on our launch team had arranged and donated the space for us to be able to hold this fundraiser at Fox Hall, which is an event space not too far from here. And so said, hey, we heard you're having a fundraiser. We also are aware that alcohol is available at this site that you're holding this fundraiser. Are you permitting people to purchase alcohol or to have alcohol? What are you doing? If that is the case, please cancel the fundraiser or we'll pull your funding. So it wasn't a check. It was like the reverse of a check. It was like, hey, I'm taking the checks back. And so I was like devastated. I was like, oh no, because for sure at this place we were renting, there was in this big, huge auditorium hall, at the end there was a bar. And if someone wanted to go over there to that bar, then they could go and buy a drink. Just like if you went to Longhorn and you could go over to that bar and you can buy a drink too. In fact, at Longhorn, they'll even bring it to your table, right? So it just that's what it was. And so I was like, man, what in the world am I going to do? So I knew exactly what I wanted to do, right? I knew what I wanted to do. I knew what I wanted to say. But I was like, that's not the good You know what? I need to practice some submission here, right? So I called Fox Hall and I was like, hey, how much would it cost for me to buy out the bar so it's not there for our event? And they were like, I don't know. I mean, let me see. I was like, yeah, I'm going to need a number. And so they gave me the number. And so I took it to our management team, which is a group of pastors and leaders that help oversee what we do at Foundation. They currently still are a part of what we're doing as we transition to local leadership, which we started about a year ago. And so very much so, I took it to them. I said, hey, here's the deal. Here's the letter. I scanned it, emailed it to them. They received it. So they got a chance to read over it ahead of time. It was the first thing on our agenda for our management team meeting. And so I was like, hey, here it is. Da, da, da. And so one of them looked at me and said, so what are you thinking about doing? And I was like, well, what I'm thinking about doing and what I know we probably need to do are two different things. Because I actually have a place I'd like to stick this letter, and it's not in the mailbox. But I know But I know for sure that's probably not the best thing, right? And so I went and I did my research. This is what it would cost, which sounds weird to pay money to raise money. Like that's a little, but I get it. I understand y'all are probably not going to think like I'm thinking, and so I told here's the number. And so then one of the people on our management team, they looked at me and they said, well, that's probably the biggest waste of time you've had this week. And I was like, okay. I wasn't sure if they were agreeing with me or not. It was a very, very ambiguous statement. And I was like, all right. And they're like, yeah, I mean, walk us through what you really are thinking about it. Not what you want to do, but just what you think about it. And so I shared with them, which they already knew, that I had a heart to plant a church for people who are completely disconnected from God, which meant that we were going to be honest about alcohol and not pretend that the Bible forbids it, but be upfront and honest that the Bible does say, hey, when you begin to lose control of yourself, you have crossed a line where God is no longer proud of what you're doing. And the control is enormously essential to when it comes to who we are as followers of Jesus. Now, I pair that with, I don't drink. And it's because of my family history, not because of what the Bible says. Right? So I don't drink because there's a lot of nasty history of alcohol and substance abuse in my family. And I've seen what it can do. And I don't want that to happen to my family. And so I avoid it because maybe it's genetic. I don't know. Right? So I just say, you know what? I'm just not even going to tempt myself with it. However, I also pair that with my biological father was killed in an accident when I was 4 years old. And it was alcohol related. And so I've got a little more baggage than a lot of people probably do with it. However, my personal baggage with it and the things that I need to recognize about myself, it doesn't mean that I get to make up what the Bible says about it and pretend. And so for sure, I also believe that if more churches in the 70s and 80s and 90s were a little more honest and allowed people to say, hey, I'm having a problem or I'm having a struggle, a lot of the people that hid it and put it under the rug, and then they had problems for decades, they would have come forward and gotten help quicker and sooner. And maybe the trauma in families wouldn't have propagated the way that it had. And maybe that night that my dad decided to do what he was going to do, maybe someone would have been standing around him that says, you know what, I'd like to inconvenience myself for the good of another person, and I'm going to step in and make sure he doesn't get behind the wheel of his car. But there wasn't, right? There wasn't. And so I want to plant a church, and I want to be a part of a church and lead a church that has people who follow Jesus that hang out at the bars. And they don't have to hide if I walk in or move their drink and like, this was here when we sat down, right? And they said, okay, well, we support you 100%. And I was like, cool, I'll call them. And they're like, whoa, let us call them. I was like, okay, fine, you call him. Later the next day, I got a text message from another church. Same story. And so we told both of them, and thank you for contributing so far, what you've contributed. We greatly appreciate it. Wouldn't be here without you. But we're good with you giving the money you allocated to us towards someone else. I had to stand in front of our launch team, which at the time was about 76 adults, and let them know that our fundraiser made about $14,586. And we lost $90,000 because of it. It's not the way a fundraiser is supposed to go. But it also gave me the opportunity to tell our launch team that just because you write large checks doesn't mean you get to determine what's right and wrong. We'll let Jesus do that, and then we'll fall in line. And from that moment, our church, starting in January, has now existed as of 2 days ago for 57 months. And we have met or exceeded budget every single month, 57 out of 57. When we look at the issues that are happening, not just in the local church, but in a global church perspective, there's a new study that came out by Pew Research Center in March of this year. And the headline of the study was, "Decline of Christianity Shows No Signs of Stopping." This is one of the quotes from the article. People are giving up on Christianity. They will continue to do so. And if you are trying to predict a future religious landscape in America, the question is not whether Christianity will decline, it's how fast and how far. And now the main culprit for this is something that's referred to in studies as switching. Christians deciding they're not Christians anymore, or people who are not Christians deciding they are Christians anymore. When we look at this, currently 64% in the United States would identify as a Christian, 64% of people. 33% of those raised Christian will eventually switch to none or no religious affiliation. And only 20% of those raised without religion will become a follower of Jesus. So you can see the discrepancy that's happening, right? 33 walking away, 20 coming to, while there's enormous decline. At the current rate of switching, 46% of Americans will identify as Christian in 2070. That's down from 64 today. Here's the important one. If the rate of switching continues to accelerate, as it has since the 1990s, that number will actually drop to 35% by 2070. And this is my favorite quote from the article. Revival could happen. There's just nothing in the current data that indicates it will. Would you believe that the cause of switching comes down to two major reasons? Reason number one is people don't see the need for a politicking Jesus. Still see the point. They already have a Republican nominee or a Democrat nominee. They've already got someone they can follow on Twitter. They've already got someone they can go to their campaign speeches and listen to them talk, and they can sit in person, all those things. And so all of a sudden, churches try to make Jesus be Republican or Democrat, which is comical to me. I enjoy it. When someone comes and asks me, and they're like, hey, so would Jesus vote Republican or Democrat? It is one of the greatest questions you can ask me, because I promise, just in case you were wondering, I'm going to look at you and say that there's not a lot of dumb questions, but that one's probably up there. You know what I'm saying? Jesus would look at you and say, are you freaking kidding me? Are you freaking kidding me? Neither the Republicans or the Democrat hold a candle to who I am. Right? They don't. None of them do. Because I've never cheated a single person. I've never lied a day in my life. I've never led in a way that didn't lead to a healthier humanity. Not one single solitary time. I've never made a mistake. I'll never make a mistake. I'll never lead you wrong. I'll always make the right decision. When things are the toughest and the most tense, I promise you can count on my leadership. Republicans and Democrats? Are you kidding me? He would look at us and say, I'm a freaking monarch, right? I'm a king. You don't get a vote here, right? You don't get a vote. You don't get to weigh in on what's right and wrong. I've decided that because I am goodness, the embodiment of who God is. So when we try to fit Jesus into something we've created, he's like, I'm too big for that. I'm too big for that. It's like you trying to build a birdhouse and you live in the birdhouse. Like, it just doesn't work. His creation can't create something to then shove him into. Now, what people want is not Democrat or Republican rhetoric. They want to know what Jesus thinks. And they want to follow Jesus, not because it aligns with their political value system. The second reason is that people are realizing that Sunday morning is valuable, so they won't waste it on something that has no value to them the rest of the week. They're beginning to realize that, hey, Sunday mornings, man, they're about as prime as it gets in terms of rest and family time. I don't want to give that away to something that's completely irrelevant the other 167 hours of my week. Like, why would I want to do that? Why would I waste the time just to go and feel bad and get yelled at because the pastor saw me with a glass of red wine at Longhorn? Like, that's what I'm giving my Sunday morning to? I get it. I get it. When they looked at the switching epidemic, they actually were able to narrow down the overwhelming majority of people that are doing the switching, going from one thing to the other, from Christian to none. The age group where it's happening predominantly, the overwhelming majority of the time, is ages 15 to 29. 15 to 29. So hold that thought. We're going to come back to it. So the question becomes, knowing this, what have we been doing about it? Right? There was a study that came out about 3 years ago that pointed it in this direction. This just puts an exclamation point on the very same study we were looking at in 2019. So when you look at what we've been doing, what we've been attempting to do, is we know that we're a church plant that will continue to be involved in planting churches. And so we've been involved in 32 church plants nationwide, whether it's in providing resources or funding or coaching. In some form or fashion, we've invested heavily in 32 church plants all over the country, from Northeast to California, Arizona, Ohio, Seattle, everything you can think of in between. Our ice cream truck. Our ice cream truck sits outside on Sundays, but it's an enormous part of who we are in our outreach strategy. We believe that when you get down to it, you ask a lot of people who are disconnected from faith, and the reason they're disconnected from faith is because the people who are connected from faith are awful people to them. And so we said, hey, the very first step we need to make in our community is not to be awful people. How do we do that? Let's just give away ice cream. And so that's what we do. We just simply go and give it away and try to add value to whatever they already find valuable. There's no strings attached. We don't hand out things. We don't require them to let us give them a piece of paper. We just say, hey, you've got a cause you care about. Let us provide ice cream to everybody who comes to your cause. That's it. You got a 5K, you're raising money for fill in the blank. Let us come and give ice cream to every single person that's showing up. There's no cost. There's no cause. We're not talking about our church. We're just there to simply serve you. If somebody's got a question, of course we'll engage and answer it. But other than that, we're just there to simply say, hey, we just want to serve. We've been able to do this 583 times since we birthed the ice cream truck. 583 events. In total, 102,198 pieces of ice cream have gone out of the truck. All of it 100% free. And now, some people have asked, gosh, your ice cream budget at church must be enormous. No, it's actually not. We don't give away great ice cream. It's not the greatest ice cream, okay? It's just the cheapest thing Walmart's got. And then Jason goes in and he buys the entire case, and then we come back in a week and we do it again. It's really not. Our price per unit is so tiny. You know, it's just itty bitty. In addition to our ice cream truck, we believe hardcore in mentoring at-risk students in the Coweta County Public School System. I used to have I don't have them anymore, and I think it's because I've said this from stage a few times. People keep it to themselves now. But I used to have a lot of conversations when people heard that I was a pastor. They're like, oh man, what do you think about them taking prayer out of schools? And I'm like, oh yeah, that's awful. And I'm like, yeah, and first it was the 10 Commandments. They took the 10 Commandments off the wall, and now they took the prayer out the schools. And now look what all the schools are happening. It's just one big cesspool of, the whole thing. Like, dude, prayer would fix the whole thing. The 10 Commandments would fix the whole thing. And so I listen. I'm like, hey, yeah, let me tell you about this thing I found. The Coweta County school system has this mentorship program. Now, I get it, it's crazy, but they will actually pair you up with at-risk students who need a positive role model and positive influence happening in their life. And they're at risk because of one of three issues. They have an enormous academic issue, an enormous attendance issue, or an enormous behavioral issue. And when one of those three categories reaches a threshold that they keep track of for that student, they then go into a category that says if this continues on the same trajectory, the chances of them graduating is almost none. And so there's an organization called Elevate Coweta Students that has stepped in and provides tiered resources towards those students. One of those tiered resources is the opportunity to mentor those students or provide a positive role model in their life on a consistent basis. And so when we found that out, I was like, hey, you know what? Here's the cool thing. So they won't let us pray in schools. That's fine. They won't allow us to hang the 10 Commandments on the walls, which I'm not sure how you explain don't commit adultery to a first grader, but it just is what it is, right? That's fine. So they won't let that happen, but you know what they will do? This is crazy. They will let Holy Spirit-filled praying believers walk into the Coweta County Public School System and sit and have lunch with the kids who absolutely need it most once a week, every week, for the entire school year. And you know what? When the kid goes from first grade to second grade, guess what? You get to go with them to second grade. And so if you want to, you can mentor the kid for a decade, right? Jason has been with his kid from elementary school, and he's now in middle school, right? And most of the time, they just look at me and like, well, my schedule doesn't allow that. Yeah. Schedule doesn't allow it for most people. But I'll be honest with you, most people have this conversation with, they're retired, and so their schedule does allow it. They just don't actually care about what they're talking about. It's just one more thing to say out loud, to draw attention to themselves. But if we are serious about reaching into the lives of at-risk kids and making an impact, I've got a way for you to do it. We're the single largest provider of mentors in the Coweta County Public School System, our church is. And we have no intention of stopping or slowing down. We don't go and talk to these kids about Jesus, but I tell you what, a lot of these kids eventually start asking us about Jesus. If you've got time, if you've got some freedom and flexibility in your schedule, you should go by the blue tent today and say, hey, I want to know more about mentoring. You've got to be able to pass a background check that allows you to be around kids. If that's you, you should go by the blue tent today and say, hey, I want to get on this mentoring thing. The last 2 years have been incredibly difficult, especially with COVID. Last year was almost awful for our mentors. You'd go for 2 weeks, they shut it down. You go for 2 weeks, they shut it down. They shut it down for 8 weeks. You go for a week and they shut it. It was just a back and forth, and it was incredibly difficult to be consistent. This year has been night and day. Thank goodness. And it feels like the same what we were doing pre-COVID, every single week in the lunchroom, getting after it, just having conversations, playing games, playing checkers, playing Connect Four, just talking about what they're doing. You should consider it. In addition to mentoring kids, good gracious, I'm out of time almost, and I haven't even gotten halfway through. Hold on, hope you brought a snack. In addition to that, we've got tornado recovery that continues to happen. Tornado recovery began for us here in this building. We didn't own this building at the time. In fact, where you were sitting, it looked very much so like a bank. I am standing where the teller would be, right? Or the teller stations would be. There's a huge line here. And this place where you're sitting was filled with hundreds of thousands of household goods that were brought in, that we collected and then distributed into our community. There were 10,000 hot meals that were funneled through this particular place that we call Base Camp. There were dozens and dozens, 50-something yards that were cleaned up from emergency debris to make it livable, or getting into the driveway because of crews that worked in and out of this place even before we knew it would be ours, right? Tornado has been a part of our lives for the last 18 months, and it's not going anywhere. It's still ongoing. But we also knew that the beginning of the tornado work would be easier to get people to hang on to, but we were going to make a commitment that we were going to see it through to its completion. Jason continues to serve as our community outreach pastor on boards and allocations tables and a part of the meetings, and he knows everything that's happening on the tornado front. We continue to give funds and money and apply for grants and use those grants to make sure that we're supplementing people's insurance shortfalls, or things that insurance would never cover but still makes it livable. Things like home help or tree removal or skid steer rental, appliance replacement, all kind of things, both through grants and offering that we take up each week here at the church. Every summer we do a thing called Art and Science Camp. Sometimes it's referred to as Undercover VBS. I don't know if you know this or not, but we have some of the greatest science and STEM minds in the county that go to our church here. In fact, they run the STEM program for Coweta County School System, and we leverage that gift and that talent in terms of science to share the goodness about who Jesus is every single summer with kids. Robin, our Kids First director, she's actually not a Bible college student or a ministry major. She went to the University of Georgia and graduated with an art education degree. But she is wholeheartedly sold out to serving Jesus, and she leads our kids through that. And we leverage her art and her ability to teach it and get mass kids to make incredible things. And you saw, if you were here this summer, you saw the fruit of that on that Sunday where we had Art and Science Show Sunday. Over half of the kids that attended our art and science camp were disconnected from Foundation. In 2022, our foundation volunteers have volunteered a total of just over 8,000 hours. Here at Foundation, our people have taken 419 spiritual next steps just this year in 2022. The result of all this is the number that most pastors care about most. But the truth is, when you start at this number and work backwards, you're doing yourself a disservice. This always takes care of itself if you just do things the right way. And that's Base Camp. We have seen a 39% increase of Sunday morning attendance since we opened Base Camp. That's not including opening Sunday, which was just a ridiculous number of people. So our church continues to grow in enormous rates. And the truth is, if a church will consistently prioritize the outside world over its inside comfort, it will always grow. And the truth is, our past matters. That's why we've taken so much time talking about it today. Our past does matter. We learn from it. We gain wisdom from it. We've got experience with it. Our failures teach us incredible lessons. The past matters. But oftentimes, a church like ours will tend to get caught up in what we've already accomplished. We'll get caught up in our past and making sure that we can preserve it. And this is a mistake. It's one of the biggest mistakes that a church can make. And it's because the future still matters. Past matters, but the future still matters. And Jesus tells a story. There was this wealthy guy who decided to go away for a little while, and he had 3 people that were working for him. And he decided to say, hey, you know what? I've got 5 bags of gold, and he gave it to one guy. And he said, hey, I want you to do something with this while I'm gone. I'm going to come back and check on you in a little bit. And he said, okay. And so he gave another guy 2 bags of gold. And he's like, hey, I'm going out of town. Put this to work. Let's see what you can do with it. And he gave another guy 1 bag of gold and said, hey, I put this to work. I'm going to see what you can do with it. And the guy goes away, and he comes back. And when he gets back, he goes to the guy with 5 bags of gold and says, hey, so tell me about what you did with the funds that I left you. And he's like, dude, I turned the 5 bags of gold into 5 more bags of gold. Of course, the guy in charge is like, let's go. That's what I'm talking about. Well done. Yes, this is so good. And he goes to the guy with 2 bags and says, hey, tell me about it. And he says, oh, I took my 2 bags and I doubled it. I got 4 bags now, right? And he's like, yes, let's go. Great job. And he goes to the guy with 1 bag. He's like, hey, how'd you do? He's like, I still got your money. He's like, okay, yeah. What'd you do with it? He said, oh, I buried it in the ground so that I would make sure I had it when you came back for it. And in fact, it actually says this in Matthew 25:25. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. And he takes the 1 bag away from the guy and gives it to the guy who had 10, who had 5 and doubled it. He said, nah, you go do something with this. See, the guy that buries the bag is just happy to have been given a bag. Have been given a bag. In other words, he was in the past. He's like, look what I got. Look what I accomplished. He trusted me enough to give me a bag. And then he was just so concerned with hanging on to that 1 bag that he just buried it in the ground out of fear. I tell you what, we might not be the church with 5 bags, but we will not be the church with 1 bag. We will not bury what God has given us in the ground because we simply want to hold on to it. We will leverage every single thing that we have to build more in the name of Jesus, to build more in people's lives, in people's families, in our community. So the question becomes, so then what's next? Remember I told you to push pause on that where the overwhelming number of switching was happening between the ages of 15 and 29? So we're going to hit play on that. And everything we've talked about, this is where we're at. So late last year, I was asked by the leaders of the South Atlanta Church Plant Network which is now referred to or known as the Southside Collective, if I would consider taking leadership of that collection of churches that exist to plant churches in the state of Georgia. And that particular organization helped plant us. They gave us $75,000 to help get us off the ground. They were an enormous contributor, our top contributor in terms of one organization partnering with us. And it was an enormous help. And so because of that, then I jumped in, and I've been a part of it for the last 4 years. And so they asked last year, they said, hey, we've been running this for a couple of decades, and we think it's time for us to transition into some other folks leading it. So would you consider taking the lead on it? And so sat and thought about it, went through that, and decided to say yes. Yeah, I'll help lead that. And so I told them, I said, hey, I might want to think about things a little differently than we've thought previously. Is that okay? And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. And so we met for the first time at the first of the year, and I kind of threw an idea out and said, hey, I think this is a different direction you might want to go. Up until now, those churches, they put money together every year, and they take that money, and it's in a high interest deal, and they take that money and they give it to churches that are starting in Georgia. Church plants, and they try to make sure that it's a significant way. It doesn't happen every year, but they pool money every year, and then there's a big outpouring when there's a new church plant in Georgia that kind of fits into a faith criteria that's kind of set up as a statement of beliefs kind of thing. And so they would pool that money and they would give it away. And so I went to them and said, hey, I've been looking at these studies, and this was even before the March study came out. So I've been looking at these studies, and I don't know if necessarily the model that we're doing is getting out in front enough. Church planting is incredible. 40% of people that attend a new church were never going to church before, right? So in terms of the opportunity for new people to come to faith, church planting is it. It is the greatest tool in the toolbox of any follower of Jesus that we have in the United States. Is to plant a new church. It is incredible what will happen when a healthy new church is planted, right? And it's because churches that are established tend to hold the bag of money and bury it in the ground. And that's just the tendency. It's hard to not let that become your tendency. And so new church work is incredible, right? And so I said, hey, but when we look at these studies, we've actually got to get a little further ahead than simply finding church planters and planting churches. And so I'm associated with a number of organizations. One of those is here at Foundation. Obviously, I have my role here. And now I have this leadership role where I'm helping lead the Southside Collective, which is that network of churches on the south side of Atlanta that plants churches in the state of Georgia. And then I also am connected to Stadia, the church planting organization that helped us get started. I'm still very much connected with them. I do a lot of our coaching through that network for church planting. And then I have where I went to undergrad, which when I went there was called Atlanta Christian College. It's now referred to as Point University. Point University moved from Southwest Atlanta to West Point down Interstate 85. And so I was like, you know what? I want to get all four of those organizations in the same room, and I want to pitch this idea of us starting further upstream than simply waiting for someone to say, hey, I want to plant a church. And so I took it to Point University and said, hey, I would like to do a church planting emphasis week once a semester. However, you don't have to agree to that right now. I just want to do it one time. If I bring enough value and add enough value to your campus and your student body, then you can evaluate whether or not it's good to do it every single semester after that. But once a year or once a semester, I want to take a full week, and I want to bring all of the church staffs from the South Atlanta Church Planting Network. I want to bring our staff. I want to bring Stadia planters from all over the country into the campus, and I want them to share experiences with every single person that they can to start creating a pipeline for people to consider doing church a different way. Now, what's interesting is that most people go and say, okay, well, Point University has a lot of ministry students. That makes sense. Our target's actually not ministry students. In fact, half of our staff here at Foundation are not ministry students. And I kind of prefer it that way. Because a lot of times you have a lot of baggage that you've got to unpack and get past, and I don't know if there's enough time to do that with that many people. However, what Point University, like any university has, is an enormous amount of undecided majors. And so I want to put a strategy together where we infiltrate their campus, specifically geared towards undecided majors, and show them a completely different way of doing church. Because I believe that there's some people that were absolutely wired to do ministry. But they're not, because the ministry they've seen is only valuable 1 hour a week. And I want to show them something different. So we want to take some of those funds and create internships. In fact, our very first intern that has started with this kind of idea and this function is Hannah. Is Hannah in here? There she is, right back. Hannah, stand up just for a second, just so I can see you. Ta-da, Hannah. Yeah. Here's the even better thing. Hannah does not go to Point University, and she's not a ministry major. She's a political science major at the University of West Georgia, which just makes me all kind of pumped up. You know what I'm saying? But it's folks like Hannah that we want to get into the pipeline. People who just maybe have never considered that idea. I don't know where it leads. I just know that if we want to do something about it, because the study says the data doesn't show anything that points to revival, well, we should do something to give us better data. Now, in addition to what we want to do on campus with Point University, and if you'd like to be a part of that, let's have a conversation, right? Like, hey, let me know about that week. Let's see how we can figure it out. There's a multitude of things that are going to happen that week. Here, week in and week out, we have also started a high school internship program, which has already gotten started, and it's through our student ministry. And so while Hannah is a paid intern, she actually went, just like the rest of our staff, and she went and she fundraised her intern salary in like 3.5 days, maybe a week. She's incredible, right? She went and fundraised the whole thing. We have non-paid interns, which are in high school. And we have 3 of those that started the program with Adam, who's leading that. And this is open to high school students who are saying, you know what, I might be interested in taking a look at what ministry would look like long term. Right? Like I'm interested in that. And so we want to provide them an opportunity to jump in. And so Adam has constructed a 9-month program to give them a taste and to help them discover, is this for me? It's my hope that the interns that are here in high school become a part of the pipeline and a part of the recruiting mechanism at Point University or whatever college they go to, wherever it might be, and that we then begin to fund those paid internships and residencies to start pumping out DNA or church staff or church planters with some of our DNA that God has given us in it. Because I believe what God has done here in Newnan can be replicated in a myriad of other places because principles will travel. Doesn't matter what context you're in. As long as you continue to put other people first and look towards the marginalized and those who are at risk, and you begin there, and you make sure your attention is always focused to who Jesus would have your attention focused on. It's the greatest discipleship model on the planet. It's like Jesus actually knew what he was talking about when he said, go make disciples, because he knew that in our mission of going to make disciples, we would grow as followers of Jesus unlike any other time in our life. That's what we want to be about. You know, when we think through why are these things so important? Simple. Because the future still matters. Now, all of these projections are 50 years from now, and it's using data from the 1990s to here, so it's got 30 years of data that they're using to project another 50 years in the future. So in 50 years, I'll be 89. Y'all think I got energy now? Wait till I'm 89. Let's go. No, which means that I'm not going to be here or probably coherent, knowing my brain, to understand if this works or not. In fact, there's probably someone that's going to be born in the next year or 2 years that will stand in my place a generation from now. And they will be the ones that see if we've given better data to show revival. I don't know how long I get to be our lead pastor here at Foundation. I don't know. I had a mentor challenge me a few years back. He said, a pastor will always overestimate what he can accomplish in 1 year and always underestimate what he can accomplish in 30. So he said, you should consider staying 30. I'm good with that. Oh, thanks. However, that still puts me really old. Because I'm 38. So 5 years ago I was 33. So that'd be 63. I'm actually pretty convinced 63 is probably not the best age for me to be leading a church. There's probably someone with more energy and more vision when I'm 63, and me standing in this role is probably not the best thing for our church. But I tell you what, the next 2 decades, I'm going to give it everything I got. And then I'm going to pray that God gives me a really good group of people around me that says, hey, it's time for you to let somebody else do this. And that God gives me the spirit inside of me that just gives me a peace. Because I want to be here for the long haul. Because I want to see this work continue to move towards giving good data that shows a different type of outcome for 2070. You know, we're on a mission to create a You Belong Here movement where people are the destination and Jesus is in the lead. And I wouldn't trade that mission for anything else in the world. And it's not my mission, it's our mission. I get to be one of the staff, which we have the most incredible staff and most selfless staff. I get to be one of us, one of the 7, one of the 8 with intern Hannah. They get to wake up every day and have God provide for our family financially through this work. But the work is nothing unless there's a group of people gathering. All of us are in this together. And You Belong Here movements are extremely difficult. Politics, personal preferences, all the things. But it's so worth it. You notice in the data, none of them said, and of the 30% that walked away, 25% were Republican or 10% were Democrat. Didn't say that. Because at the end of the day, none of that matters to Jesus. It's just, do I know you and do you know me? That's the measurement that counts. So that's what I want to chase down. And I want to make sure that we're holding ourselves responsible to have a clear and effective pathway for the next generation to jump in. So what does that mean for your family? I don't know. Maybe you've got an elementary school student that will get a scholarship in 7 or 8 years. Maybe you got a high school student that had no idea this was happening, and they're going to come to students on Sunday nights and start learning about the possibilities. Maybe you're a college student right now and you're undecided and you'd like to explore the opportunity. Maybe you're wired for it. I'll be honest with you. If I don't think you're wired for it, I'll just tell you, hey, you're wasting your time, kid. You know? Who knows? But we're going to be held accountable to it.